What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Mr. Graven. Alright, I'm just going to do one last video to give you guys only one exception to a 7 divine. There's one. Only one. Hence why I never typically talk about it, because it's almost irrelevant to most situations, because every other Mundus applies. Alright. First off, I want to keep this very simplistic. I'm trying to keep these videos simplistic for people to process, because I'm not wanting to complicate them. I have one infused head. I have a 6-1 configuration. Why? I've explained it. Due to the changes, we want to keep some critical factors applied to the passives, take advantage of the heavy armor return percentage, all of these other variables. But everything else is divine. Okay, everything else is divine. Now I want you to take a look at my max magicka. Okay, because I'm running the Mage Mundus initially. Okay, it's important. Just a very slight visualization here. 33585. Okay, 33585. Add a divine. 33547. 7 divines decreases the magicka. Why? Because of the infused. The infused value gives us more, right, than the 864. The Mundus has a diminishing return on the 7th trait, and our scale factor off of the inner light is 5% of the max. Okay, just very simplistic. Across the board, in every spectrum, with one exception, you're never going to run 7 divine. You're just never going to, unless you don't min max. The only exception to this, and there's only one, is the shadow. So if you switch out Munduses, say you're a person who switches out Munduses, right, between dungeons and trials, it would not be in your best interest to necessarily pick up a divine unless you have another piece, a secondary piece to optimize. Okay? I'm just pointing this out for the record. Why is that? It's very simple. Because, once again, the justification for critical push. Okay? Because you're dependent on critical modifiers. Because the shadow increases what? Critical modifier. So you add that. And when you add that to minor and major force, that 1% is magnified by the 2 other variables. It's that simple. If you're going to use the Shadow Mundus, that's a big if, depending on whatever, as long as you're at 60% crit, let's say you're at a 60% critical value, it's justifiable. I wouldn't recommend going over 70 at any given time. Why? Because base damage drops, and then you run into a lot of problems in that association, in my humble opinion, because your top load starts dropping. But when you go ahead and you pick up the Shadow Mundus, the only exception, you will achieve a slight bump due to the minor and major force. Okay. 10-4, 10-5. Okay. Now, when you go with that's with the infused. So, let me go ahead. One more. So, you see the boost when the minor's applied. 10-7. 8. Okay. When it drops, it will significantly even reduce that Mundus' effect. Same thing with the 4% to what? The max stat pool, from the Warhorn based on scaling is actually the 10% towards max stats. Sorry, 10% towards max stats is effective towards Magicka users due to what? Their inner light. Okay, that's another factor. So if you don't have that, that is also going to be another variable to that affects critical output. Okay. Now, we're going to switch this to Divine. And we get a slight, very slight bump. Like by 3 points, 4 points. Very, 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 very marginal. But it's the only exception. We get a few points, very few. And that's with minor and major going to be applied. It's the only exception. Every other Mundus across the board, you would never use 7 Divine. Not the Lover in any situation. Because if we use the Lover as a stam, we overpen value. We can scale weapon damage and apply force damage to offset the difference between the penetrating values. Every other scenario, in every other case, across the spectrum, you would never run a 7 Divine. It's just the way it is. Okay? I didn't make up these laws. Okay? I didn't. So I was like, you know, I guess I should tell them about one exception to the rule. But it's so marginal. It is so literally marginal. Like, it's like, you know, being very, very, very picky. Very picky. And the only reason it magnifies at that level is because of all of the said factors. Okay, so when I apply this, what you're seeing is when, like, Warhorn is up, when you get that Warhorn buff, I don't know if it's applied yet. But when you get the there it is. When you get the Warhorn, you get the major force and the minor. When you get those 3 factors, that's when the 7 is justifiable. And I've always said the only time a 7 Divine is justifiable is with 100% uptime on Warhorn. Not because of just major force, but the scale factor from the max Magicka pool. Because when we take a look and we look at the 10% into our stat pool, we get what? A maximum of 32,000 max Magicka. That should be actually a little more. Yeah, it is. We get 35, almost 36. Deduct the 10%, right? We let it drop off. And if that 10% falters, that's why another reason I say that new tanking set's going to fail. It's going to. Okay? Because when this buff drops off, is Warhorn still on me? Yes. We got to wait 1 minute and 33 seconds. When it drops off, the shadow literally, the crit modifier due to the stat on top is reduced because base damage is also a contributing factor to critical output. That's another factor. Okay? So, once again, it is a marginal difference, but it's significant. So, if that's why I'm like, in every other spectrum across the board, we have the diminishing value. Okay? Whether or not you're using a scalable effect or we're seeing, you know, the diminishing rate. What's the one variable that changes between the two, right? Is the applied buffs. Okay. And I've said time and time again, the only way you're going to get, and I've said that in a build video, I would rather have more consistency, so I go with 6 Divine, 1 infused after these changes. The only time you could justify 7 is if you have 100% uptime on Warhorn. That's it. And it is marginal. Okay. Waiting for this buff to drop off still. 3, 2, 1, boom. Now we go down. We lose almost 2,000 off of our stat pool. So if we hit this target dummy now, we see significant decrease because we don't have all those buffs. Okay. So we have a 5197. Now if we go ahead, now we're dealing more. But why? Because the max effect in the major isn't applied. Okay. So there you guys have it. I figured I would do this and explain why I never go 7. Why I never go 7. That's why. And that's across the spectrum as far as everything. The only time you probably justify it is the shadow because of the multipliers. You're dependent on those multipliers. But if you were on anything else without the 10% gain towards max stats, and even if you were only dependent on the major and the minor, your 7 would falter. Okay. There you guys have it. And for God's sakes, guys, stop. You guys are just making yourselves look like fools, man. Seriously. All right, I'm out. Peace. Love you guys.